I think my leading question for everyone today is, what are you going to do differently as a result of what you've heard over the past couple of days? And I don't know if some of you have already been thinking, I'm going to go back and I'm going to have this conversation.
The last few days a waste of your life? Or did something change when you walk out that door in terms of thinking or doing?
One word, think.
You're going to think?
Digest.
So, well, that's a challenge to some of you with an incredibly tightly scheduled diaries. Time to think and reflect.
What I will do differently is to design my research going forward, thinking more about how we will improve the lifestyle of individuals. I think that's what I will do going forward. And because most of my research is on cognitive function, the effect of diabetes on cognitive function, then I think I'll have to think differently going forward in that direction. Thank you.
I think I learned that healthcare will completely move to identifying diseases as a person. And I think AI will put all basic scientists out of business. I think it'll just take over machine. This is the last big invention I think humans are doing. But I also learned that this whole, how we have learned to look for drugs will not work, and it will be the person as a whole and looking at the entire, all diseases in context. How it will happen, I don't know, but it definitely will happen. That's what it looks like.
So I'm reminded of the axiom of changing a tire on an automobile while it's in the racing mode. We both have to work on the stuff we've already got underway, but actually redo it. Because if you stop and wait until there's enough maturation in the things that we just talked about, you'll lose that period of time. But you're doing work, and the clinical trial we're getting ready to initiate hopefully in January, I'm now thinking, what part of that should I retool? And if I do, does it delay the outcome, or does it confuse the target audience, which is in this case the FDA, by providing far more information that I'll know how to interpret and give rise to a whole series of more relevant questions 5 years from now than next year. And the risk of that, while patients are waiting, is not a trivial risk. So I'm trying to sort this out in terms of philosophically, does one assume that the change is in the next race venue over, and I'm going to run this race while these folks are in this audience, and then I'll go run my new car in the new racetrack. So,
by the way, McLaren has a chief medical officer, and he's not responsible for the folks that are in the Formula One.
Well, the reason I raised that, spent years in Indianapolis, and I don't know if you know, the original Indianapolis 500, there was a driver and there was a mechanic who rode in the car, because the cars broke down so often they would have to repair on the backstretch. So there wasn't things like a pit stop to stop. They would get out and fix it and then go back around. So
I have in mind the discovery of the periodic table by Mendeleev, the beginning of the last century, how one person could synthesize all known information on physics and chemistry and deduce this deeper structure of how matter was organized. And I think this idea of metabesity, this idea of aging, driving many diseases, what we're hearing from the AI world, suggests that although a human might not be able to do it, we may come up with a periodic table of disease and health, where we'll see what information is missing and fill out, so we'll know optimally what kinds of things to do in the right situation. So it's quite an exciting time, actually. So
if I can just comment, we didn't have time to cover all this stuff, but Alex was describing how he was using AI for drug discovery. Well, life science product development is research, development, and commercialization. So in development, you're talking about taking those stacks that Thomas showed for in silico biology, which is systems biology, which AI will be able to suck up all that information. And interestingly, in commercialization, a lot of products are killed because of commercial assessment today. And I suppose by feeding in enough data with deep learning, we'll have a better predictive capability, a more accurate one, so that we don't have false positives or false negatives.
And by the way, I said, will Amazon buy Rush? If they're smart, they're not buying an old tank. They're buying all these companies like InSilico and maybe us, and build their own virtual company, because we are in a position to really bypass this 10-year paradigm from target to the clinic in much shorter time, and do it much more cost efficient by not just doing some old stuff, just neglecting it and coming up with different data sets.
I think we need a new set of, or an additional set of perspectives. Pharma, as people pointed out, was rather conspicuously missing. And I think we also need to have some iconoclastic views, because with all the efficiencies and speeds, you still have to test a drug in a human being. And then our understanding of so-called diseases, and we've named one Metabesity, do they actually exist? The one that I know the most, multiple sclerosis, I'm not sure that's a disease just because somebody named it, but I think we need more doubters in this conference. You can have the most fantastic artificial intelligence, but that is going to create a whole set of conditional issues to test. And then the language of medicine ultimately is not actually mathematics, it's actually chemistry. And chemistry has its own clocks and its own, if you will, structure. So I think we're sort of a circular applauding squad, and I think we need people to disrupt the thinking in these conferences more than we have in this one.
I need time to think too, but a couple of things struck me. One is that why don't we make a drug that makes people feel happy, uninhibited, and talkative for 4 hours, and if you take it for more than 2 days in a row, it stops working through tachyphylaxis until you wait 7 days or 5 days later.
Was I so boring?
Apropos of the exercise in an exercise pill, I mean, I think that the clear issue is that that would be absolutely welcome, and that there's absolutely no compunction that has to do with, this is my opinion, with the sort of accumulated problem that we evolved to move. But we evolved to the point where not moving is one of the best things we can do. Sitting and reading is the most unnatural act that there is, and yet it's the one act that can actually bring us together as opposed to the digital media. But yeah, I think it was tremendously helpful. The most important thing I heard was this blockchain, because I think that the problem going forward is metabolism is the process of managing resources in an uncertain world to keep the individual alive. And we can talk about all the obese people who are, you know, don't have a goal and are marginalized and so are addicted to opioids. But I guarantee you, if you put a fire outside their house, their metabolism would adjust pretty damn fast, and you would see.
Or tell people that you'll get mad cow disease if you eat too much beef or whatever.
Exactly,
people will stop.
or whatever it is. So. From that point of view, but the question is, who gets to be an individual going forward? Increasingly likely, most of us don't get to be individuals. So I think the blockchain and a way of monetizing people's data so that the forces of capitalism can still act, but they have to pay for what they're getting. That was one of the most exciting things that I heard and made me feel a little bit more optimistic.
So I just want to make a comment that this has been an experiment in a way, and this is kind of the payoff. I mean, the thing I hear from a lot of delegates is that they're quite surprised, mostly happy, with the diversity of approaches, the silo busting that we've done. The question arises, so what? okay, you had exposure to different disciplines, but what does that have? What practical effect does that have on us as we're trying to achieve these objectives for patients and for our companies and so forth? And I do know that, for example, Nir and Steve, they were interested to get together with the former CMO of the CMS to discuss what they need to do. Yes, there's the FDA, but what do we do about getting reimbursed if the TAME trial is successful? We were able to forge connections. I think, Joe, you were thinking maybe Stephanie or some other mobile digiceutical or approach might be relevant to your drug development. So making those kinds of connections certainly are a tangible aspect of what we've been able to accomplish in this gathering. But in the next 12 months, when we have our next gathering, I think it's an interesting question for all of us to contemplate. What can we do? What are the major things we need to do? What are the low-hanging fruits to see whether, at what point we were going to discuss, is it true that the science is there? We can debate. I think most people believe that the science is there and the promise is there. The question is, how do we enable, facilitate, accelerate the application of that science to harvest the fruits of that knowledge and make material gains to public health. And what 1, 2, 3 things can we do in the next 12 months? As Lucy mentioned, she didn't have the answers for loneliness. That was one of the memorable presentations for me from yesterday. And she said, well, I can certainly call attention. Well, call attention's great. We're starting to do that. And after this Congress, we hope to have transcripts and proceedings, so we'll be able to continue to call attention to the theme of metabesity and movement from therapeutics to prevention and so forth. But in addition, we were hoping to have a call to action, to have maybe suggest some paths forward. I think that what I've learned is that it's such a broad topic, it's difficult to do justice and do even those initial organizational things in the course of just 2 days. But hopefully this is the start of a conversation amongst us in the room and elsewhere to ask that question.